following interview is with John Rayburn, longtime farmer and former county judge of Marshall County. He's been interviewed by Dr. Robert McClory, veterinarian. This is for the Kentucky Oral History Commission, March the 3rd, 1978.
This is John Rayburn talking about old times in Marshall County.
I'll just start at the beginning.
Yeah.
This is John Rayburn. I have been asked to talk about my good friend of the past, Dr. J.J. Goff, who grew up in Benton. In his early life, he was a blacksmith and a good one. He left Benton as a young man and went to a veterinary school, got his license, and come back to Benton, where he was what we then called a horse doctor, where he stayed many years as a vet. In his latter years, he was a Baptist preacher and a good man and a good preacher. In his younger days, he was a very strong man and quick-tempered. If you got in his way or got smart with him, when I was 12 years old, he would take me with him on his calls. I never asked him any questions. When we started home, he would tell me what was wrong and if it would die. At that time, all farm work and most travel was done with horses and mules. Also, oxen. Dr. Goff, in my mind, was a better horse doctor than a cow doctor. I was with him once when he had to throw and tie a young 15-hand mule. It also tied its legs. The doctor, he couldn't get his hobbles on the mule. He had them to blindfold it. He backed up about 10 feet, ducked his head to go under the mule's belly. He ran under the mule, getting its front legs and hind legs in its arms, and through it, the mule got on its head until its legs were tied. He was very stout. After Dr. Allison died, he had his office in my shop until another vet could be found. Dr. Goff did a lot for people in Benton and Marshall County. One time he had a big livery stable in Benton, just south of Phillips Chevrolet. For several years he lived at scale. His little girl fell in an old cistern and drowned. She was 4 years old, as I remember, and a beautiful child. I helped get her out of the cistern. I think it was soon after that the doctor started preaching. His son Hobson was one of the strongest men in the nation. I will talk about him in a later time. Dr. Allison, Dr. Sidney Allison, after Dr. Goff went to preaching, Dr. Sidney Allison moved from Birmingham to Benton, where he stayed until his death. In the late 30s, he was very different from Dr. Goff. He also was a good vet and a good man. He was a slender man, not a stout man. It seemed he liked to doctor cows better than horses and was a real good doctor for cows. He also was a good doctor on horses and small animals. He was a very quiet man and did not talk a lot. He also had his office in my shop. He was sick about a year before he died, and I did his hard jobs for him showing me how when we were very, very good friends. My memory of Tater Day My father moved from Brewers to Benton January the 1st, 1914. I was 11 years old. He had a big blacksmith shop on Poplar Street where the pool room now is. When I was 12 years old, I could shoe a horse, and we got $1 for 4 shoes put on the horse. In the winter time, we would build wagons, rastas plows, ahars and drag hars to sell in the spring. A light farm wagon with a 12-foot frame would bring $50. A heavy wagon, $65. A rastas plow, $5. A Harris, $8 and $10. One tater day we took in $600, which was a lot of money then. My father, myself, and 2 more men did the work. My main job was to rubber buggies. I put new rubbers on 10 buggies one tater day. We got $16 for 4 wheels. One tater day, about 1921 or 22, I nailed on 127 horseshoes. My father turned them or fit them shoes, and I nailed them on. There was lots of mule buyers for the government, and the mules were shipped from Benton to Columbia, Tennessee by rail. A good 15-hand, 4-year-old mule would bring $200. A 16 and a half hand, $250 to $300.
How did you fix those mules, make them taller?
Yeah, the mules were sold by measurement. Let's see, 4 inches,
Yeah.
4 inches is a hand. A 16-hand mule would bring $200. A 16 and a half hand mule would bring $250 or $300. So we would pull the hind shoes off. He would be barefooted behind. We would put new shoes on in front and raise the cart a little bit. Not enough to be noticeable to the government buyer, but enough to make the mule bring $50 more. The court square would be roped off on tater day. It would be lined up around the court square. There was a big log chain all around the square where the curb now is. People tied their horses there. The middle of the street was full of hamburger stands. You buy a hamburger for a dime and a glass of lemonade for a nickel. The medicine men, the streets were full of medicine men. You could buy a big bottle of the medicine for $1 from the snake doctor. It would cure the grip, bellyache, rheumatism, flat feet, dander, any ailment. It was also good for your horses or cows. I guess you could take $1 worth of the red brick dust and make Clark's River into the medicine from Benton to Paducah. But he would sell out. They also had Punch and Judy shows, Negroes picking the banger. One tater day, Squinch Bond put a pony in a building, put some oats in a trough, tied the pony's tail to the trough, and had a big bullhorn to tell the people to see a horse with his tail where his head should be. He charged 15 cents. When people come out and was asked about it, they would say it was right. His tail was where his head should be. He also cooked a big vat of hog's head and turnips on tater day and sell them all you could eat for 15 cents. A mug of black coffee for a nickel. Most farmers brought 2 or 3 biscuits with them with some sow belly, and that's what they would have for their dinner. There would be very few women or children come for the town was full of horses and mules. The farmers would buy a new pair of plow lines, have their plow points sharpened, get their seed potatoes, a new pair of duck head overalls for $1, 3 cans of Mary War Live for $0.25 to make their summer's supply of soap. And also they'd buy a dime pair of socks and a nickel's worth of striped stick candy and go home to start their crop. There was a lot of horse traders then, like used car trailers now. One of them was Mr. Jim Thompson from Olive.
Yeah, you go ahead. No, I just want to say it's
I have seen him bring as many as 50 horses on Tater Day. You could go to his barn in Olive, tell him what kind you wanted, and he would not cheat you. But you go to jockeying with him, and he would set you afoot if you didn't watch. He had a horse they called Sleepy Jim. He had beautiful horse. I remember him. He was a dark bay, 16 and a half hands high, slick, and a very beautiful horse. He had had blind staggers, but he got over it in a way, as long as you was on him, it was holding his head up a little high in a tight rein, you would not know there was anything wrong with him. Mr. Thompson did not use a saddle on him. He would ride him with a blanket, and he would keep him moving. When he traded horses with you, when he got off, he would take the blanket and the bridle and say, "He is yours," and he would go to staggering. You'd think he was going to fall. He wouldn't fall, but you could not control him. Then he would trade back with you for 25, 50, or 60, or whatever amount you could pay. Finally, some man from up in some other county north of us heard of him, come and traded for him and took him away. Mr. Thompson offered him a big price for Sleepy Jim, but he would not let him have it. He also had a nice mule that was ruptured on his side, not under his belly, up on his side. And the way I remembered, it was as big as a gallon bucket. He would ride that mule with a blanket like it was going to slip off, which was covered. When he traded with you and took the blanket off, there was the rupture. It was not against the law at that time to trade a horse with something wrong with him. You were supposed to be alert and look him over and be satisfied. I saw an old man like Myers come to town one day with a big, nice mule. He brought him up in front of our shop. He sold him to a mule buyer. And the mule buyer gave Uncle Ike just what he asked for him. And when the mule buyer put his halter on him and started off with him, Uncle Ike said, "Now let's see you ride him." I never will forget how funny the mule buyer looked back at him. I saw a drummer come to Benton one Tuesday after Tater Day. He said he had always heard of Benton being a one-horse town, but he did not believe one horse could make all that mess around the square. I only missed one Tater Day that I can remember. In 1942, I was working for TVA in the mountains of Tennessee and did not come to that Tater Day. This is John Rayburn talking.
Tell us about that case where the old man took him to court because he said his mule wouldn't pull. Remember that story?
Yeah, see.
Remember who he was? You know,
Yes,
he said it'd do you good to see him pull.
He stuttered. Burl Bell. Is you ready?
Yeah, that's right.
Dr. McCrory asked me to tell another tale that I know of, which is the truth. There was a man that lived out near Oak Level. His name was Burl Bell. He traded the man a mule one time, and the man asked him, Mr. Bell, if the mule would pull. He said it'd just do you good to see him pull. The man bought the mule. He put a load of tobacco on. He started to Paducah with it. He got on the other side of Oak Level to a big hill. The mule wouldn't pull anything. He had to get another mule to go on Paducah, and he come back. He sued Mr. Bell. The day of the trial, when they put Mr. Bell on the stand, he asked him if he guaranteed the mule to pull. Mr. Bell stuttered. He stuttered around a little. He said he did not. He said, I told the man it would just do him good to see the mule pull. And he turned around to the man. He said, ain't that just what I told you? And the man said yes. And so Mr. Bell did not have to pay him any damage.
Well, let's see. Who was it that they took the man to court because he sold him a cow that didn't have it wouldn't claim a calf? Some old man sold a cow and a calf, and the man asked him, said, now, is that her calf? And he said, oh, yes, sir, it sure is. And got home, and the cow kicked the calf out of the barn, and they took him to court, and they asked him, says, is that cow his calf? He said, yeah, I know it is. Said, I gave it to her myself.
I don't remember that. That's
Somebody told us.
That's somebody else. Dr. McCrory has asked me to say something about Hobson, Galen Hobson Golf. I remember Hobson from the time we moved to town. He was a little older than me. He was very big, as far back as I can remember. Not fat, but big and very strong. I was as afraid of him as I would have been a big bear. He even played rough. He went to the First World War very young, I would say about 18. He got wounded bad in the Battle of Blue Wood or Argonne Forest, I don't remember which, in Germany. A grenade exploded and tore part of the mastoid bone from behind his ear. For a while he was paralyzed, but he overcome that. His mouth was drawn to one side a little, but you sure didn't want to say anything to him about it. He became the world's stoutest man. He flew over New York City from under a plane, holding himself up the wire cable in his mouth. He tore a Sears and Roebuck catalog in half while flying over New York City. He could take a new number 2 horseshoe in his hands and straighten it out. Wrap a piece of 1 1/2 inch 3/8 flat iron around his arm, slip his hand out and hand it to you. Hold his hands together, hitch a horse to each arm and hold them. Lay on his back, put a board over his chest on each side, and let a 1 1/2 ton truck run over his chest. He went to Mayfield one time to buy an A-model car. He went in the showroom, he picked up the front end of the car, looked underneath it, turned it loose, let it fall, it bounced like a rubber ball. The salesman ran out as white as a piece of cotton. He was at my shop once, and Mr. Dillard Lentz from Dogtown was there. He told Hobson he believed he could throw him in his own way. Hobson told Mr. Lentz he was afraid he would hurt him, but he could try it if he wished. Mr. Lentz backed up about 6 feet, ducked his head, and come running into Hobson. Hobson had his arms folded, and he did not unfold them. I never did know how he did it, but he turned his body some way. Mr. Lentz hit the ground on his stomach and slipped 8 or 10 feet. His hands and knees were skinned, his clothes was torn. He got up and said, I believe let's not wrestle you no more. Hobson and
I hear a lot of talk from the older fellas about how they'd buy these old Skinner mules, and what kind of business was that?
well, they would skin the horses or mules, and Mr. Oscar Brannon had a bunch of land up south of 408 now, up above where the radio station is, WCBL. He had a bunch of hogs up there in the bottom, and he would give $2 a head carcass, $2 a carcass. They would take those horses up there, put a blindfold on them, and knock them in the head with a sledgehammer and take the hide off. And they would take them to Paducah to tick and sell the hide. I saw them one time come from Mayfield, and they had 22 head. They was driving one to a little hack of the thing, and the others had their heads tied to the other one's tail right on back. They took them up there and skinned those horses one day, all but one. The next day they loaded them 22 hides on that hack and went to Paducah, which took 2 days to go there and back. And when they got back, that horse that they drove Paducah, they took him off down on Town Creek, back of their house up in Cole's Edition, and took the hide off of him and brought it to Benton and sold it. They only brought $18. In Benton, you get $4 a hide more than Paducah. And now it would be a pretty good horse. I guess it'd bring $100 if you had him now. He's able to haul 22 hides to Paducah and then come back.
Now they kill 20-something. How many hogs would be out there to eat them 20 carcasses of horses?
Well, I imagine that Mr. Brannon had 200-300 head of hogs up there.
Well, now,
I don't imagine he knew how many did all
was
that.
that Hatler Morgan's daddy-in-law?
Hatler Morgan's daddy-in-law, and he had a vast amount of wood land there, and they'd eat acorns and hickory nuts, and then he'd rent land of corn. Instead of putting it in a crib, he'd just have you take it up there and throw it off, and those sows would have pigs up there in the bottom, and they just maybe slave 8 or 10, or maybe 1 or 2, or none.
Load of corn.
Yeah, back in the Depression, in 1930, we had the drought. You didn't make anything. 1931, the season was one of the best seasons I've ever seen. That fall, when they gathered corn was selling, you couldn't hardly sell it at all. Hayes and Olds lived at Brownsburg and brought a load of corn, a wagon load, my shop one morning, and asked me
Is that
where.
the old bachelor up there?
No, it's the barber out at Brownsburg. He used to barber here in Brownsburg. He lived in Brownsburg. And I told him that I didn't have any idea where he could sell it, but I'd give him 15 cents a bushel for it. About 3 o'clock that evening, he come wanted to know where I wanted to throw it. And I took it out in Cole's Edition and threw it in my brother's hayloft. He come back down to Miss Nonnie Cole's and had a coal yard then and weighed the wagon. He liked the bushel of having 20 bushel. And a while back, I was looking for a receipt. I have every check that I ever give. And in hunting that receipt, I found that check from Hayes and Olds, and it's $2.85 that load of corn brought him.
19 bushels.
But at that time, you could buy a bag of flour for 50 cents, and you could buy meat for just down practically nothing. And he said he had to sell it because everybody was in the same boat. And if Hayes and Olds is still living, I think he'll verify that.
Now, they tell me that Mr. Thompson owned lots of land, and that people had worked for him, and they'd pay him every night.
That's right. He owned 13, I heard him say one time. I heard a man ask Mr. Jim Thompson how much land he had, and he said he had 1,300 acres. Mr. Thompson was not an educated man. He couldn't, for a long time, I don't know if he ever did not, he couldn't sign his name. He couldn't read and write. This man said to him, he said, "Jim, you've been awful lucky, haven't you?" Mr. Thompson turned around and he said, "Lucky hell, while you was asleep, I was out there working." You know, you didn't beat him. He didn't have any education, but he was a smart man.
Yeah.
He knew what a dollar, where it come from, and what it was worth.
And if you left it up to him, he'd treat you right. But if you
If
tried
you
to
went
cheat him,
out there, I went out there one time and I bought a cow from him. And at that time, everybody had a milk cow. And I told him he'd also in the latter years dealt in cows. And I told him, Mr. Thompson, I want a cow to take home and milk. And I want you to give me a cow and tell me what you want for it and a reasonable price and a good cow. I don't know what I want. He said, I've got one that'll suit you. And he sold me a Guernsey cow for $50 as one of the best cows that I've ever owned in my life. And he would do that, but you went out there and go to jockeying with him and dicking around with him. And brother, he had a bunch of men working for him. He had a bell outside of his house there, and some of the older men at Olive still remember it. At 4 o'clock in the morning, that bell rang and Mr. Thompson rung it.
yeah.
And you'd work for him, you'd come in at sundown, and he paid you every night. You was paid for your day's work. And if you didn't take it, well, you didn't work. He paid every day for his day's work.
Well, now they say, somebody told me that his times changed and he wasn't able to adapt, and he told somebody, he said, I'll be broke before I die. Was he or not?
No, I don't know about his money. He had his land when he began to get old. After he got to where he couldn't work, he rented his land out. He had some of the timber cut off of it, and he kept some horses and cows around the barn and traded a little there. He quit going to trade days, and then they got a law passed where a horse had to be sound and so on. So Mr. Thompson, he had his land, and I am sure that Mr. Thompson at that time, of course times have changed. I know I've heard my daddy say, talking about somebody in the county that was a money lender, and he'd say, well, I guess he's got $10,000. And at that time, that was a lot of money. And now, for a man that hadn't got over $10,000, well, he's about what he
can't
gave
make
me
it
all
on
the
poverty
corporate.
level.
Isn't that right?
Well, what about, did Mr. Thompson loan money?
Mr. Thompson would loan money, yes. Back then, there was quite a few men out in the county. Mr. Monroe Gold, my father-in-law, Mr. Lamp Fond, and Mr. Ed Ivy out in
Monroe
Missouri.
Gold now, is he in the kin of Dan and
That
Joe?
was Dan and Sam Gold's father.
Is that right? I
And
didn't know you was
they'd
tied
loan you
into that.
money at 10%.
Yeah.
If you could borrow it at the bank, you'd have to pay 5 or 6, but you had to have everybody in the country on your note.
Yeah.
And they would go and take a mortgage on your stock or your home or something and loan you 100, 200, 500 or something dollars at 10%.
Well, back in those days, of course, the dollar was what did they get, about 50 cents a day for 4 o'clock in the morning until dark day?
I think Mr. Thompson paid $1.
Yeah.
I think I remember him paying $1. I know at that time, right here back of your veterinary place, my father had a field back here and had 5 acres in it. And I had it in corn nearly every year. And Mr. Joe Walston, which is Eddie Walston here, his father, and so on, tended that corn for me. And I had an old sorrel mare that was a good worker, but she walked fast. And he would plow that 5 acres of corn in a day with a double shovel and charge me $1.
Mm-hmm.
And that was in the Depression.
Well, now I can remember down in Mississippi that they used to, my daddy used to get the niggas to plow.
I remember something about, talking about Mr. Oscar Brandon. He had a sawmill here and he cut lots of timber. And there was Amos Penny out and lived out across Clark's River, was working for him. He was a great big stout fellow and drew $1 a day. And said, They would saw down trees with a crosscut saw. Mr. Brandon went up talking to him, and he asked Penny had one hand on the saw pulling it. He was a big stout man.
You mean he by himself, he was
No, there's mine on the other end, but Penny just had one hand.
Yeah.
Mr. Brandon's byword was "Consound, old boy." He said, "Consound, old boy, haven't I got both of your hands hard?" He said, "Yes, sir, Mr. Brandon." He said, "Well, consound, put them both on the saw." And they drew $1 a day.
Well, I heard another story on him about some guy had a little old heifer. Did you hear that story?
Yeah, Mr. Jim Parks. Mr. Brandon rented land for a calf. Uncle Jim Parks, that was raised here in Benton, it was Jim Morgan's father-in-law, the painter. He put a calf up there one spring on a pasture, and Mr. Brandon charged 50 cents a month. He left it there for 6 months. Frost come. Mr. Brandon went down to Parks went down to pay Mr. Brandon for his calf and went to go and get him, and it was $3. And Mr. Parks said, "Well, Mr. Brandon, the calf's not worth $3. He said, "I think I'll just give you the calf for the pasture rent." And he said, "Well, consound, old boy, I guess you would." And he made Mr. Parks give him the calf for $1.50.
Oh, boy. Let's see, when I came here, which was in 59, Roberts, what's his name, bank, commercial.
Floyd Roberts.
Floyd Roberts. There was people out here, I knew one old man that was buying them, right out here by the radio station. He was paying $15 a month to him, buying a piece of property, a little old house and 4 or 5 acres of land. I guess it's worth $50,000 today. And I knew of fellas that whenever they wanted a cow, they just called Floyd Roberts.
That's right.
And if they wanted a cow killed, why, they called Floyd Roberts. And if they
That's
went
right.
coon hunting and killed a possum,
They sell
They'd
Floyd
go out
Roberts
there,
high.
they'd sell
I
him
remember
high.
Floyd Roberts, the boy, and he was known back then, years ago, as Goat Roberts.
yeah.
And he had a horse and a buggy, and he had a little coop built on the back of his buggy, and he traded in billy goats. He'd buy goats from you, or he would come and trade you a nanny goat for a billy or something.
Yeah.
And when he was just a boy, and that's how he started.
Well, now, who was his people?
His
Where'd they
people,
come
his
from?
father was named Jimmy Roberts, and he owned the place out here where, what's the name, Van, the grocer, used to be out on the right before you get to John Ed Barnes. You know, there used to be a grocery store there.
Yeah.
The next house up is a dairy there now. I forgot who owns it. That's where he was raised. His father was named Jimmy Roberts, and his brother was Beulah Roberts, who was Van Roberts' father.
Yeah. Well, I remember somebody telling me a story about the carnival came to town. Did you hear that story about Van Roberts or something? Not Van, but Floyd. Floyd, didn't he used to go down in Arkansas and selling tobacco or gambling or doing something or other?
Well, I remember back, I don't know what year it was. I know beer was legal. They had a place in front of Chevrolet Garage, a little sandwich place, and Floyd was in on it, and they had slot machines then. I've seen Floyd leave Benton on a Monday morning. He'd go to Paducah through Cairo, go down across the river through Missouri, and cross back at Memphis and come back to Benton, and he'd have just a trunk full of nickels and dimes and quarters. But they were legal then.
Yeah.
When they got illegal, why, Floyd...
Well, somebody was telling, I knew he had some connection, because somebody was telling me that the carnival came to town, and some old poor country boy got hooked up on some game, and they just cleaned him out. So while they was kind of holding him up, somebody sent for Floyd Roberts, and he came over there and got in the game. I don't know if it's playing poker or doing something. And Floyd won all the man's money back, and laid a pistol up on the table, and they all backed out. Anyhow, the man got his money.
I don't remember about that.
I heard that story. I don't know who told it.
But Floyd Roberts has helped more people, more poor people in Marshall County than nearly anybody. When you went to the bank and couldn't borrow money, You'd go to Floyd Roberts and he would loan it to you and he would not give you. I remember one time, and that's not been too awful many years ago, the farm where Golden Rod Kirk now owns.
Yeah.
And I own some land down the road from it there, about 2 miles, of 90 acres. He come to my house and tried to just nearly make, he had a mortgage on the land, and the man died or something. Anyhow, he had to take it back. And he tried to get me to take that 90 acres for $4,000. And he said, John, I don't want you to pay any money down. All I want is 5% interest. And I didn't buy it. And today, the 90 acres with the house on it's worth $150,000.
Well, I knew that, like this old man out there now, he was paying him $15 a month.
That's
And
right.
that was buying it, the house and all.
Yeah.
And there's no way in the world he could rent it for less than 50. So I just noticed that every time you turn around, why, Floyd, man want to buy a cow, well, I'll look up Floyd and get me a cow. Or if I've got a mule or something on
I remember something about him.
What about the hosiery mill?
The hosiery mill in Paducah that went bankrupt. It was sold at auction. The building, machinery, and so on, and the accounts. They had a gang of accounts where they'd sold socks to these stores and things. And Floyd bought it at auction. And he got those accounts all together. He sold the machinery to somebody, and he got collecting those accounts. And there isn't any telling how much money he made. And about a year and a little after he bought it, there's a fellow come Paducah up to Benton one day hunting Floyd Roberts. He found him and he said, Mr. Roberts, I want to pay you rent on that house. He said, I've been out of work, and he said, you're the nicest man I ever saw. He said, you never have done me or anything. And Floyd said, well, I've got a bunch of houses. He said, now just which one is that? He said, it's that one there that you bought when you bought the hosiery mill, Paducah, beside of it. And Floyd didn't even know he got the house at all. And the man paid him, I think he's getting $10 a month rent for it. Anyhow, he paid him, and a day or two, Floyd went down there and looked at the house. He didn't even know he got the house at all.
Man, some story. Well, did you ever have anything to do with working any oxen? Did you work any oxen or shoe any, or did anybody around here work oxen?
My daddy shod lots of oxen. Their shoes were split in half, where their hoops could
Well, how did they, what kind of nail did they nail them on? Wasn't that pretty?
You took a regular horse nail and you cut it off about 1/3 of the head of it, and then you put it in a vise and you made another head on it. It was a little different from the head on a horseshoe, and the walls of their hoofs were very thin, and you had to be careful. But you would think they'd be very wild, but they was not. After you got one broke to where he would work, why, he would stand for you to shoe him. It was a little hard because you had to stoop down lower than a horse is like shoeing a pony, I never did shoe one. My daddy shot a good many in his younger days. I remember seeing cattle. The last yoke of cattle that I ever remember coming to Benton working, farm work, they brought a load of hay to a liver stable with a yoke of cattle one time, right down the streets of Benton. There's gravel in. I remember one time seeing a wagon mire down right in front of the courthouse steps between there and Nelson's drugstore one time with 2 hogs of tobacco. They hitched 2 more mules in front of them, they didn't pull it out. They hitched 2 more in front of them, and they tore the hounds out of the wagon and walked out of the front end. They had to get some skid poles and load them back on another wagon like loading a log.
Yeah.
And that happened in Benton. And
What year that was?
well, sir, I'm going to guess that would have been about 1915 or maybe 16 or something. And then going towards the depot, after you passed the Baptist church there on Main Street on North Main, from there on down, there's one house which Charlie Lyles lived in. He's a mail carrier. and then on down for 3 or 4 blocks, back a little piece off the road, there's a colored man, Boy Ford, which was a blacksmith and a horseshoer. His wife did washing for people, and he lived there, and there was a colored church then back behind him.
Well, when did we, I didn't know we ever had any colored niggers in...
Oh, yes, Mr. Oscar Brannon had 2 or 3 families of colored people down there that made stave hooks for go around tobacco hogs. And they would draw them with horses and so on. And then right up here where the land you own now, right the other side of the veterinary place, there's an old lady named Mandy Owens. And she had 3 or 4, 5 children, and she washed for people here. And then there was Boy Ford, the blacksmith. And there was one, his name was Owens. I can't think of his given name right now. And his mother was Aunt Mandy Owens. They was, and Dr. Stilly had a colored fellow that stayed with him till he died. His name was Jim Jenkins. And then Jim Epperson was the caretaker or custodian and mopper at the Bank of Marshall County. Uncle Jim Epperson and his wife.
Oh, that was... Well, now, was that true about them killing, shooting some lady up in...
Birmingham?
Birmingham or somewhere?
I was small. I remember when it happened, my daddy come to the trial. They got out of hand at Birmingham. There was a tobacco factory there. And they fried tobacco. And a big tie yard down the river, and there were lots of colored people. And they got out of hand, and they bought them a bunch of rifles, and they'd get out of the night and practice, and they'd march like soldiers and so on.
Is that right? I never heard
One
of
night,
that.
a bunch of white men went in there on horses, and they take them down to the riverbank top. I was whip them with a horse whip. They went to the house to get one, a little smart colored boy that he hid in the house. And he got his gun, he shot back at him. They shot through the house, and I think I know they killed a baby. I don't know if they killed the lady. I think they killed his mother or something. But anyhow, the next morning, there wasn't any colored people much in Birmingham. My dad-in-law, Mr. Fawn, lived 6 miles up the river from there, and they said about 10 o'clock the next day, there's 8 or 10 of them passed their house, and their shirts still bloody in the back, and they had their clothes in a little bag. And then when TVA come along and took Birmingham over, and I think Bernard Holland is still living, he'll tell you that. There was a good many of those. You had to have a certified abstract deed. And some people had built on those lots, and it was their house. The TVA paid them for the house, and they had an awful time going back chasing down those colored people's heirs where they could get the money for the land.
Huh.
And that happened in about, let's see, I was born in 1903, and that happened in about 1906 or 7.
Yeah,
I'm going
we
to
just heard that.
Dr. Allison told me about it several times.
Well, now, was he from Birmingham?
That's right. They lived about a mile above Birmingham, and they had a big farm there. He had a brother, and the doctor said that him and his brother was plowing one time down on the river, plowing a mule laying by corn. The road was a mile long. He said, were a mile long, and he said he saw his brother, heard his brother all the wool, and saw him taking the mule out. And he asked him, what is the matter? And he said, I'm going to the house. He said, if ever I say get up again, the damn mule's going to be a setting in my lap. He went to the house, packed his bag, and went out west somewhere, and went to school, and turned out to be a smart man. I've forgotten his name. His older brother was named Edgar Allison. I remember him well. When they sold out Birmingham, they went up the other side of Hopkinsville and bought a big farm. And Selden Allison fed cattle by the hundreds there, and he married a Ferguson girl, Carter Ferguson, from here at Benton.
Well, what was the name of the guy that was in the Bank of Benton? a few years ago that they talked about never hit a day's work in his life. There's always trading and swapping around. Let's see, what was his name? Kind of had a nickname like Slap or, who was in the Bank of Benton back?
You mean he worked in the bank?
Well, owned it, a president or director, had a lot of money in it. On the other end, the old north end of Benton, I thought.
Oh, Hud Strauss?
Well, Put
Clint Strauss, Put Stilly, yeah, Put Stilly. I heard Put Stilly say one time that he did 1/2 a day's work. When he was a boy, he hired out to load gravel down there in Town Creek, and he worked 1/2 a day, and the man gave him 50 cents. And he sat around the courthouse. He bought and sold mules back during the Army, him and Dolph Burnham, and he owned half of the houses and things in North Benton. He owned a bunch of land where Lampkin Buick, all from the railroad track on into the river where the cesspool is and so on. But still out and owned him for always. And I remember when he had that brick house built up there where Morgan Hill now lives. It was one of the nicest houses in town.
Well, did he have any family?
He had one girl. He married an old maid. I've forgotten, I believe she was annoying her father. She worked in the drugstore here for years and years. And they was up in years when they married. And she never had been married, and neither had Put. And they married, and they had one daughter. And I think she's in Florida. I can't remember her name now, but he had it fixed, his will fixed, to where she would draw so much a month and so on. I don't know what. He had a lot of bank shares, a lot of stock in the Bank of Benton.
Well, Ambrose Thompson, I heard a lot of stories about
Ambrose
him.
Thompson was raised at Brewers. I've known him all my life. He was older than me. And he was raised the house on the left. When you turn right, go to Mayfield, or turn left and go to Brewers, where Avery Palmer now lives. That was his old home place. And Ambrose didn't marry later up in years, and he married Miss Nola Thompson, an old maid school teacher. First school I ever went to in my life, Miss Nola Thompson was a teacher. And Ambrose got a job then. That was something. The country boy got a job in the bank. And then when Mr. Solon Palmer died, I heard Mr. Peterson, Uncle John Peterson, was a very smart man at the time. He could look farther down the road than any man I nearly ever knew. And I heard him say one time that he thought that when Solon died that the bank would collapse, that it would go broke.
Yeah.
And it just couldn't do business. And he said, you know, that young man, he called him Ambrose. He said, you know, Ambrose is taking over that bank, and it's doing better than it ever did. And Mr. Peterson, he couldn't understand that.
But did you ever have anything to do with J.D. Peterson much?
I've known J.D. all of his life. I know Mr. Peterson one time bought the second gas pump ever was in town. The first one I ever remember was put in there in front of the Rexall drugstore, and you turn a handle, and they would a cog go up like on a coal oil, old-time coal oil drum at the store, you know, and it'd draw 2 gallons. Mr. Peterson put one in front of the store, and it had a 5-gallon glass up there, and you had a big lever down the bottom, you'd pump it up. And he bought J.D. a car, and I think at the time it was an Oberlin, a pretty good sized car. And I was there one evening in front, and J.D. drove up and putting some gas in. And Mr. Peterson come out, and he said, now son, he said, I want you to not drive that car over 15 miles an hour. And if you're going down the road, and you see a bareheaded man coming up the road in another car, he said, you pull over and stop and let him by. And at that time, everybody wore hats, you know, but then some of these smart ones, he thought, you know, was going bareheaded. I
Them
remember
hippie
that.
types, huh?
And not drive that car over 15 miles
Well,
an hour.
then he used to ride a motorcycle too?
Yeah, and he flew an airplane. I remember one time they arrested him for it. I don't know what they did, but he cut the tops off some trees there in the courthouse. A bunch of men was sitting in under there. He would go over on the Tennessee River and then the Agnes Ferry Bridge, and he'd fly under the bridge where the boats run between the bridge and the water. And,
somebody said that his mother was talking about J.D. said he was drunk and flying. He said, well, thank the Lord, said he's flying. If he's in the car, I'd be afraid he'd hurt somebody.
yeah, she was an acre, and I remember very well, Mr. Peterson too. Mr. Peterson was raised out up in Callaway County, out about 2 miles southeast of Oak Grove Church, and every Sunday morning he'd hitch his horse to a buggy. He had a buggy with stick back seat on it, and it didn't have a top on it, but he had a parasol so it was hot. And he'd go up there and see his mother and his sister every Sunday. Mr. Peterson would go up. Oh, it was out between Wadesboro and we're out in Callaway County, about 2 miles out from Oak Grove Church.
Well, I've heard a lot of old stories back in the old days, and people got something in them. People would actually not give a man a nickel. I mean, he starved to death. Do you think people are getting better or worse?
Well, yes, I think it's different. Back at that time, if you had a neighbor, you'd give him a little something, but there wasn't any relief, there wasn't any food stamps, there wasn't anything. I've seen grown men 40, 50 years old, come to my shop barefooted, have a shirt on, patch on top of patch, a pair of overalls had been washed, was as white as a bed sheet. You could buy a pair of overalls for $1, but if you didn't have $1, I remember one time after I married, and I had a great big kid, didn't have a pair of shoes fit to wear to church. And I walked from Benton to Jimmy Hauser's. I heard he'd been to St. Louis, and I found a pair of shoes there that fit me, a pair of slippers, tan slippers. And I got them and paid him for them as $1.50. And then I paid him, I had 50 cents left, and I walked every step of the way back to Benton. I bought a pair of shoes a while back, and they charged me $32 for them, and I had the money to pay for them. They talk about the good old times. I'd rather pay $32, doctor, for a pair of shoes, and have $32 to pay for it, than to give $1.50 and walk 5 miles and have 50 cents left.